The Toronto Maple Leafs announced their new GM today, and there's already speculation he may be able to swing a big trade with his former team in Calgary. Plus, there's the latest trade talk around the Carolina Hurricanes. We actually have a trade as well to discuss between the Edmonton Oilers and the New York Rangers. We have some signings and other news from around the league. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a fair bit of NHL news and some trade rumors to take a look at here today. Before we jump into the news, though, I just want to take a second and have another one of those on this day in NHL history moments. On this day, way back in 2011, True North Sports and Entertainment announced the purchase of the Atlanta Thrashers, bringing the return of the NHL to the city of Winnipeg. And, of course, they obviously became the Winnipeg Jets version 2.0, but it was a very joyous day in Winnipeg as they found out that they were getting their hockey franchise back. Obviously, the Winnipeg Jets and Quebec Nordiques both left Canada much earlier than that, and we went a good stretch of time with a lot fewer Canadian teams. So the return of the Jets was a big moment for the people of Winnipeg. Of course, in Atlanta, things were not working. They didn't really have an ownership group that really wanted to keep the team there. They basically went through all their different avenues trying to get that sorted out. And here we go. In comes True North Sports and Entertainment to purchase a team and move them to Winnipeg. So really, as you hear the potential for Atlanta as maybe a future expansion franchise, even though they've been there before, actually on two different occasions, a lot of their struggles and issues were more about ownership than it was about fans. So I wouldn't be completely shocked if they do reconsider going there again down the road, but obviously with the right ownership group to make sure that the third time is the charm when they are successful and able to stick it out on a longer term basis. Now, as I mentioned, we actually had an NHL trade today. It wasn't a huge trade, but it could potentially turn out to be one down the road depending on the prospect involved. But the Edmonton Oilers and the New York Rangers completed a deal. Of course, there's several NHL prospects right now that need to be signed by June 1st or their rights are going to be expired and they're able to either become free agents or re-enter the draft. But the Rangers traded prospect centerman Jaden Gruby to the Edmonton Oilers in exchange for a 2023 fifth-round selection. I think his last name is pronounced Gruby. It's either Gruby or Grubby. I'm not quite sure. It's Grubbe. He was taken 65th overall in 2021. I have seen him play, but it's been a while, and I'm not quite sure of the exact proper pronunciation, but he's a big centerman, 6'3", 200 pounds, a right shot center for the WHL's Red Deer Rebels. So pretty solid looking prospect. I'm not sure he's going to be a big superstar or anything of that nature, but certainly somebody who looks like he should have a decent shot at least playing some pro games. After the trade, it was announced that he'd have to be signed by June the 1st, but that didn't take much time. Within a couple of hours of the trade being completed and announced, the Oilers then announced that he had been signed to his 3-year entry-level contract. So he's all signed, sealed, and delivered as now an official member of the Edmonton Oilers. So we might see some other activity over the next couple of days before this deadline passes. Obviously, the first is quickly upon us here. Not much time left, but we'll see what happens between tonight and tomorrow if any more prospects are announced. I know some other prospects. For example, I know in Ottawa we get confirmation. They actually have 3 that fall on this deadline. There's Ben Roger, Carson Latimer of the Winnipeg Ice and the WHL, and Chandler Romeo. All 3 of those prospects that are unsigned and are having their rights expiring here shortly have been confirmed by GM Pierre Dorian that they will not be offered a contract. So they will be able to re-enter the draft or go about being a free agent down the road. So we'll see what happens in that case. Now, we also had a couple of signings as well. The Vancouver Canucks re-signed defenseman Jet Wu today. He gets a 1-year contract, but it's a 2-way deal. Of course, Jet Wu was a pretty good-looking defensive prospect when he was drafted. I believe he was also the Red Deer Rebels organization as well in the WHL and been playing with them in the minor leagues. He gets a 1-year extension to continue working on his development to see if he can get a chance to play some NHL games this year. And we also seen the Carolina Hurricanes sign Justin Robitaille to his 3-year entry-level contract. Of course, his was another scenario where he could have expired here soon as well with his playing rights, but he's had a pretty big role. He's been a big member of the Quebec Ramparts. Of course, the Ramparts under the tutelage here, Patrick Roy won the Quebec League Championship and are currently playing in the Memorial Cup, and he's played pretty well, I must say. So obviously, good idea for Carolina to sign him. I think he has some real potential there. We also seen A couple of movements within the GM world. Of course, we also had the news in Toronto, but the Toronto wasn't the only team making news with their GM. The Seattle Kraken today also announced that general manager Ron Francis has signed a 3-year contract extension. So obviously he's been there for a few years now. He's been obviously the original GM. Obviously his work started long before they iced the team because there's lots of work to do to put together the team. I know last year things didn't look great in their first season, but obviously this year they made huge strides, got into the playoffs, won a series, and did a lot of things for the first time. And, certainly a way better team than they were last year. So we'll see if they can keep things up. And I think it's well deserved here that Ron Francis continues to carry on with at least a few more years in Seattle since they've made good progress in such a limited amount of time. But of course, the big news of the day did come out of Toronto, getting word earlier today from the NHL insiders, and then it was later announced and confirmed by the team itself. But Brad Treliving is the new general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, in case you want a little bit more detailed analysis, I did do a dedicated video on that news earlier today. I'll link it here in the YouTube cards, but obviously I went through a lot of the moves that he made in Calgary and a lot of his history to say, some kind of pros and cons about his time as a GM and how I thought he fit as, with the Leafs GM role. There's certainly some things to be optimistic about and a few things to be cautious of, I think, which is probably fair to say in most cases with a lot of GMs. The Maple Leafs will be holding a press conference tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock Eastern time to introduce him and answer questions and talk to the media. So we'll see what they say. As of right now, based on the reports from NHL insiders, it's expected, and we'll get probably confirmation tomorrow, that Sheldon Keefe will remain as head coach. It's not looking like he's going to bring in a new coach right away. I know if you look at his history, when he started in Calgary, he inherited a coach, and that was Bob Hartley. And Bob Hartley was there for almost 2 years. So we'll see what he does. I mean, history indicates that he's willing to, work with that coach and see what happens. Word was as well that Brendan Shanahan was telling GM candidates during interviews that they were open to bringing Keefe back. And they also mentioned that they're, willing to bring back the big four forwards as well. So we'll see about that. Obviously, the GM is going to have a say in kind of reshaping this team here. But the belief is that he'll be retained. He is entering the final year of his contract. So be interesting to see if they go about things the same way they did with Dubas and say, okay, we're going to ride things out and reevaluate after the season, or are they going to give him an extension now, or how is this all going to work? They'll have to talk to Keefe and see if they get all that sorted out. Obviously, there will be some changes to the staff since they lost Spencer Carberry, who was a great addition for their forward group and power play. Since he's now the new head coach in Washington, they'll certainly be looking to bring in somebody to replace him. But we'll see if there's any other changes expected, and likely can discuss that tomorrow. Now, with the trade talk, we got the end-of-season media availability from Carolina Hurricanes general manager Don Waddell and head coach Ron Brindamore talked to the media today. And it sounds like the Carolina Hurricanes might be quite open to doing a lot of business this offseason. Don Waddell made a lot of comments that certainly made us think that we could see, I'm not sure we're going to see a lot of significant change within the Hurricanes organization, but I think it's fair to say that it wouldn't be shocking if they're involved in at least one significant trade and maybe some other kind of smaller ones with the supporting cast, so to speak. But for example, with the goaltenders, Freddie Anderson and Antti Ranta, both pending UFAs. And of course, Kochetkov is, the goalie of the future as it looks right now. He's under contract. They made mention that both goalies expressed interest in returning, but where they both need new contracts. Essentially, Waddell said that they're going to have to talk to them, see what the contracts would look like, and kind of make a decision. It doesn't sound like they'll both be back. I would suspect they're going to want Kochetkov to be in the NHL and one of the veteran guys there to remain if they can work things out. But wouldn't be shocking, depending on what they want for contracts, if they go in a completely different direction. Hurricanes do this before. We know that they're only willing to pay so much. Whatever they value the player at, and they determine that's the max contract. If they want more than that, they're not going to sign him. And that's just how they do business there in Carolina and Tom Dundon and Don Waddell. So to me, I would expect Anderson or Ranta to come back and work with Kochetkov. But if their contract demands are too much and they don't feel it's fair value, I can see them completely moving on altogether. Waddell was also asked about Max Pacioretty, who of course missed majority of the season this year. To me, it sounds like there's interest in returning him to the lineup and getting him re-signed, but at the same time, I think they're quite cautious in doing so. They can get him on a cheap deal, maybe, but I mean, This guy's used to making, $7 million a year. I know his price is going to have to come down due to the injury history now. He's getting older, a little bit less productive. But, he wasn't even sure when Pacioretty was going to be able to play next year, how the recovery was going. So to me, I wouldn't bank on Carolina bringing Pacioretty back. It's possible, but far from a guarantee. But he also mentioned that he wanted to get a little bit heavier and obviously wanted to add some scoring, but they also talked about the fact that they score a lot by committee. And certainly, they have guys who could have bounce back seasons next year, like a Treliving, for example, and guys like Jarvis are still, young and getting better all the time. So we don't know how much of a, increase we could see in production from a player like him. So I don't know that they're going to go on and do too much, but I think that like a lot of teams, they're going to want to add, a beefier, strong, power forward type of guy to their lineup, and we'll have to see how that plays out. Hurricanes also have a lot of players entering the final year of their contracts, so it'll be interesting to see who they offer contract extensions to and who might be potential trade bait, and see how they go about things that way. You get guys like Treliving and Aho, just to name a couple there that are going to be decisions on, they'd like to sign Aho longer term by the sounds of what they were talking about today as well, but we'll have to see. But I wouldn't be shocked if Carolina's involved with trying to bring in, a top forward of some sort to add some more scoring. Lots of other decisions to be made, but Waddell made it known that he expects to be heavily involved in this summer's trade market. Now, with the announcement today of Brad Treliving being the new general manager for the Toronto Maple Leafs, there's already a lot of fans talking online, expecting a potential blockbuster trade between the new GM in Toronto and his former club with the Calgary Flames. I've seen a lot of people talking about the possibility of a William Nylander for Elias Lindholm trade. Now, some fans seem to like this idea, others don't. I just kind of wanted to mention it as a food for thought. We know Brad Treliving knows that team very well after working there for 9 years, clearly. So, obviously, if there is a player on that roster that he thinks would be really good in Toronto to help make the Leafs better, wouldn't shock if he calls up his old pal Craig Conroy and talks trade. That would not be the least bit surprising. A lot of people feel that out of the top four forwards, if the Leafs are going to change up their core and make a move, that Nylander is the most likely, given his, contract and the fact that he needs to be renegotiated. His new number that he's going to be looking for is likely going to be a fair bit higher. That might be troublesome to fit in under the cap. And obviously, just if they want to shake things up, that might make the most sense. But at the same time, like I said before, numerous times now, within that big four group of guys, they all have a unique skill set. They're all a little bit different. And I just think the Leafs need to be very, very cautious here on how they go about things, because it's going to be tough to win any trades involving many of these players. Now, in the case of Elias Lindholm, the argument there is they get a legit number 2 center. Obviously, in Calgary, he was the number 1. But to put him as a number 2, it means he'd be a really, really good number 2. If he can be back to being that 40-goal scoring centerman, was just 1 year removed, then that would be a huge help. I mean, that would be a case where they could make Tavares be more of a winger, which has been something they've already experimented with at times. They'd have a more legit number 2 center there to put in to kind of help with that transition. And obviously, from a cap perspective, Lindholm makes less than Nylander this year, but they both have 1 year left on their contract, so both teams would be in a similar predicament that they'd have to negotiate contract extensions. William Nylander was actually born in Calgary. He was mostly raised in Sweden, of course, but his dad, Michael Nylander, of course, of Swedish background, mostly lived a lot in North America while he was playing in the NHL, and Nylander was born while he was a Calgary Flame. So it's not really a homecoming for Nylander, but I think that might be part of the reason why people like to talk about, when they're talking about these types of trades between the Leafs and all these other teams, that Nylander going to Calgary seems to be a thing because of the connection there where his dad played there and he was born there. Obviously, like I said, Lindholm is a really nice player. Lots to like about that as well. So, I mean, I do understand the possibilities here. But what I don't expect to see is I don't expect either of these teams, with having a brand new GM in Craig Conroy in Calgary, and obviously not our new GM, but new to Toronto GM and Brad Treliving, to make a trade just for the sake of making a trade. Now, Nylander and Lindholm are different kinds of players, but at the same time, they have some similarities as well. But of course, I don't really know for sure how each team and general manager would feel about that kind of trade. But, doesn't make each team better. I mean, if the Calgary Flames trade Lindholm, they'd probably prefer a center coming back. But at the same time, Nylander might be a really good player who could fit with either Kadri or Huberdeau. I mean, I can see how he would fit in quite nicely with some of the other players that are currently in that top 6, and I think he could make them better. I mean, Lindholm, we know, was potentially wanting out, but I think after Sutter was removed as coach and the other changes they've made, I think there's a decent chance Lindholm might change his mind and be open to staying. So not to say that he wouldn't end up staying after all, but I'm just not entirely convinced this is the trade for both teams. If they're looking to do something to shake things up, it would accomplish that. But like I said, I don't think that you're going to see a huge blockbuster trade just for the sake of making a trade. I mean, I wouldn't be totally shocked, to be honest, if the Maple Leafs end up with all 4 of their top forwards back on the team in the fall, and Sheldon Keefe's behind the bench, and they end up with the big change ends up just being general manager, which really, at the end of the day, was something that most of us never seen coming, because we didn't view that as being the problem or the part of that really needed to change to make them better. But it sounds like they're open to bringing back everybody else. So if that's the case, are they really going to want to make that kind of trade? I mean, obviously, Brad Treliving will have a say here. We don't really know, where he was just announced as new GM, what he's going to think and feel about all these things. So we'll have to wait and see. It's going to be a busy time, a fun time. But at the same time, we know Treliving is not afraid to make big trades. Wouldn't be shocking if they end up doing something with his old club. It's quite a common occurrence with GMs as they move around the NHL anyway. But let me know your thoughts. Should Brad Treliving call up his old pal Craig Conroy in Calgary and work out a trade? Do you think a Nylander for Lindholm deal makes sense for either side? Who says yes? Who says no? Let me know in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.